Developers don't like technical controls that you enforce them to go through when it comes to security.
This is DevOps Paradox, episode number 232, Real-Time Application Security Using Arnica. Welcome to DevOps Paradox. This is a podcast about random stuff in which we, Darren and Victor, pretend we know what we're talking about. Most of the time, we mask our ignorance by putting the word DevOps everywhere we can and mix it with random buzzwords like Kubernetes, serverless, CI/CD, team productivity, islands of happiness, and other fancy expressions that make us sound like we know what we're doing. Occasionally, we invite guests who do know something, but we do not do that often since they might make us look incompetent. The truth is out there, and there is no way we are going to find it. P.S. It's Darren reading this text and feeling embarrassed that Victor made me do it. Here are your hosts, Darren Pope and Victor Farsick. Victor, we've been hearing people raging about supply chain security for the past few months.
People rage about security all the time. We just change which part of security we are raging about.
But is it really a technical problem? What do you think?
It's never a technical problem. I repeated many times, if we could just rid of all the humans, our industry would advance drastically, immediately.
And you are now listening to an AI-generated version of Victor as he's saying that. On this episode today, we've got Nir Valtman on from Arnica. Nir, how you doing?
How's it going, guys?
Good. Do you agree with that basic premise that the problem with supply chain and really everything else in business isn't a technical problem?
Yes, I tend to agree. At the end of the day, there are some technical problems to solve, but every company works differently in their development lifecycle and their priorities. What I see by those conversations that I have is that most of the companies just faced with the basics of prioritization. They try to figure out what is important for their business. And then when they find what is important for the business, then they start asking the questions of how do I go by remediation? And on the remediation side, it's not about the technical problem about how you solve it, but it's more related to who can solve it, which is, again, it's not necessarily a technical problem.
But there is that, what you just mentioned, that every company operates differently and does things in a different way and what's not. I always thought that that's a big part of a problem. I mean, I understand why, let's say, Google works differently than anybody else because they're facing problems that nobody else faced. But vast majority of us are not facing problems that nobody else faced. And it would be so much easier if we would just pick one of the, 5 solutions for a given problem that was already solved by somebody else.
Well, we could pick many solutions. I mean, if you think about software supply chain security, you can split the world of problem into, let's say, 3 big domains. You can say, I want to focus on protecting the developers. I want to focus on developing maybe or protecting my source code. And maybe you want to focus on protecting the application itself that you are developing. Each one of those have different solutions. Maybe on protecting the developer, you want to identify certain account takeovers or maybe insider threats, someone that plants a backdoor in your source code. Not many companies are facing with the same risks. Maybe, I don't know if you heard about a Tesla employee that suggested a bribe to actually plant a backdoor in the company. Right? So it's very rare and it needs to be a high-profile company. But then if you think about protecting the source code, then you can see, dozens of events in the last year that were mainly focused on exfiltrating your source code. Now you can tell, I'm embarrassed of my source code. I don't mind anyone to steal it. But then you can actually get to the point where your source code is your real IP. It can be your algorithms. Hard-coded secrets is also a problem, right? If someone steals your repo, then they might find your secrets to your production environment. And this is completely different than, protecting the product that you develop, which is where you see more traditional application security tools playing, which is the static code analysis, the software composition analysis, maybe license violations, reputation, infrastructure as code, and so on. So various solutions But it doesn't matter which one of them you'll implement, you will likely implement it first where it's important for the business.
So how does the business decide which one's most important to them?
There are a few ways. I can tell you how I did it in my previous roles. And then I can tell you, how we look at that from the Arnica standpoint. But from a practitioner standpoint, in my previous roles, I really liked to go to two key people in the company to understand what need to be protected. The first person is the CFO, or someone in the financial organization that is senior enough to know where's the revenue coming in from, which products sell the most, or which products maybe are cash cows. But at the end of the day, need to understand what is important for the business. And then the second person that I like to speak with is someone in the function of a CTO or a CTO organization, depends the size of the company, because the CTO may be working on the next generation of a product or a strategic or transformative initiative for the company. And therefore, I liked to combine the input from both sides when I built the application security program or application security programs that I led in the past. Now, there is a technological way to identify that high correlation to development. At the end of the day, when I'm looking at organizations that we're installed at, we can definitely see a high correlation between the repos that are more mature in their security practices, not necessarily in their secure coding. So for example, we see if we evaluate the entire world of all of your code repos in the company, we can see differences between branch protection policies and whether you have maybe infrastructure as code in those repos, and whether you have the infrastructure in code and you actually deploy. And do you have pull requests, or maybe you don't have pull requests? Maybe certain workflows in the company or CI/CD pipelines in the company depend on that pipeline of a different repo that may seem to be stale, but it's key repo for the rest of the repos. So it's a behavior-based approach combined with some graph analytics that can give you really good answers about what is higher priority for the business and what is lower priority for the business.
I want to go back to the two roles you were talking about. And I want to propose a third one. It's going to sound like a joke, but it's not going to be. So you said CFO,
Yep.
CTO, and I'm going to assume that we're actually working in a physical space. Whoever is in charge of cleaning the building.
Okay.
And here's the reason why I'm saying that. The CTO maps to the application. So you had a three-legged stool. You had people, source code, and application. Correct?
You have the people, the source code, and the application. Yes.
So the application, I'm going to dump on the CTO. The source control, I'm going to dump on the CFO. But for the people, I'm going to dump that actually on the people that clean the building. Why? Social engineering. Because how many people have access to buildings after hours that could walk around to all the desks?
Let's say you can go to the desks, and let's say that the developers don't have laptops and they don't take them home. Yet, I wonder, there are a few risks, right? If someone wants to take over your account, that would be hard. Unless you have the whatever password on your screen, which developers don't tend to do that.
No, they
on the
push it
flip
to
side,
Git.
That's a different story. But on the flip side, if you stole a developer's laptop, hypothetically, you should have the copy of the source code on it, or whatever the project that developer works on. So there might be a combination. Again, the defaults today on laptops or Windows machines, Mac machines, is that you actually have an encrypted drive. So even in that case, that might be a bit challenging to maybe impact. On the flip side, if you get a phishing email, which by the way occurred in September of last year, I think, GitHub came out with a notification that was sent to a lot of developers. I can't recall if it was all or most, where they warned developers about specific campaigns of phishing that were targeted towards those developers that essentially tried to take over those accounts. Putting aside what happens today, specifically on GitHub, there is a huge initiative to enable multi-factor authentication on all users, all user accounts. And this is going to be huge, because at the end of the day, even if someone manages to drive you by a phishing campaign, there's still a second factor. Where it doesn't protect you is if you put the secret in the code, like a token, and you utilize that token somewhere. So there's pros and cons, and obviously there's holes in the process. But overall, as I mentioned, there are 3 types of domains that you probably want to protect. Each one of them have different solutions.
I'm guessing that when we talk about protection, there is very often in companies some kind of defense mechanism against it. People are not very happy being more protected because that usually means more administrative work or something like that, kind of less productivity. Is that your experience as well, or?
So it depends what you want to protect. Developers don't like technical controls that you enforce them to go through when it comes to security. Let's say if you'll enforce developers to use a certificate on their laptop to push code, they will find a way to bypass it, or they will make sure that all of that process is so streamlined that any piece of malware can steal that certificate. They want that simplicity. On the flip side, if you bring a solution that is very simple for developers to utilize, then you can get to a better adoption. You can see some security tools in IDEs, for example. Maybe that's the conflict that I can emphasize on. So you think about an IDE plugin that shows you all of your static code analysis risks and all of the packages that are vulnerable and such. Now you've got 1,000 of those that you see on your machine. Which one is important? I have my own tasks. Should I actually fix those? Or what will fail my pull request? Is anything going to fail that pull request? So there's really important questions to ask when you're in the IDE in front of the developer. On the flip side, what if you could maybe bring the developer only the issues that he or she introduced in that particular feature branch? That makes things easier. Right? It's still a security product, but it's a different approach that essentially focuses the developer in the right context on the right things. And then you'll see more adoption, in terms of fixing vulnerabilities.
Yeah, that's similar to my experience, that it needs to be split into sufficiently small chunks so that somebody actually does it instead of getting depressed with how overwhelming that something is.
Correct. And then not only that, think about the security side. So security obviously want to flag more to fix more. But as you just mentioned, you need smaller chunks. So what I've seen to be a successful practice in previous companies is that you could actually implement a policy with whatever scanner you want or whatever tool that you want. But the idea of that policy is that you actually enforce 0 new, let's say, high severity vulnerabilities or high severity risk before merging that code into your production branch. Right? So you can actually bring certain policies that are fairly easy. There are small chunks that you can apply this policy towards that chunk. But then if you're monitoring SLAs, for example, you can go back and put a rule in your pull request that says, if anything past the 2 weeks, month, and it has high risk, then don't let the code to be merged. So you can look at both directions, the 0 new versus SLA, and then you can bring it in chunks.
What happens when you have a high sev that wasn't a high sev? Meaning you had something went in, you saw it was a low, and you're ignoring it. And then all of a sudden that one actually got reclassified from a low to something higher. That then crosses your threshold of, nope, we can't do that. How do we handle those kinds of things?
The way to handle those things is, first of all, I suppose that you refer to use cases where, let's say, a specific package has only low-risk CVEs, and now that package has a high-risk CVE suddenly, and now it became high risk. Although it kicked off an SLA, but there's no real SLA too low. Now you need to start counting an SLA that is on high risk. So therefore, the solution for that is, first of all, you update that finding, although no one changed it. And then you reset the SLA according to the risk level or the risk severity that you associated to that risk. Now, at that point of time, what you can do is put it in the pull request, maybe start with, hey, there's a new update. This is a comment on the pull request, but I won't block you from merging the code. But then when you get to that SLA, you'll start blocking. So you can, maybe take a more FYI approach in the first 2 weeks, month, and then just enforce it at some point. Does that make sense?
It does. It's basically the clock starts again. If you
Yes.
reclassify, the clock has to start again.
Yes, although it shouldn't start again if you add new CVEs to in the same severity. For example, if you have a high risk and it's a high risk and now there's a new exploit, you probably shouldn't change the SLA, but there's another factor that you should look at when you look at those findings. I don't know if you guys heard about EPSS by any chance. Or maybe the audience didn't, so I'll just go with it. So there is CVSS, which is a metric that gives you essentially a score based on certain calculation of the risk. There is additional metric that can also tell you whether a specific third-party package maybe there is an exploit open for that third-party package. But the third way to do that would be just looking at an open source threat feed that is called EPSS. And in that threat feed, they give you the prediction of exploiting that package in the wild. So if you look at let's say log4j, for example, you will see that it's super red in its wide exploitation. It's still super red. But if you look at other CVEs that might have high risk and they're fairly new, or maybe they don't have a publicly known exploit, then you can assume that it's probably not going to be exploited that widely as others. Again, it's a prediction, so it's not accurate, but it can give you a good enough indication about the next steps. And maybe you can prioritize your risk based on public exploitation. Maybe you can prioritize your risk based on other factors, but the business importance of the asset, whether it's exposed to the internet and such. But at the end of the day, you just need to have multiple indicators that comprise a risk.
Most scanning tools are static scanning, right? You have log4j library somewhere in your package, in your application. There is a vulnerability, it's high. But how often do we take into account runtime? Maybe actually there is no single invocation of that log4j in my application, right? Maybe neither me nor any of the libraries I'm directly using is using it, but you know how it works with libraries. Half of the internet actually gets downloaded, right?
Correct. So first of all, I'm a believer in runtime assessment of third-party packages to get more context. The challenge there are some challenges. I can talk about the static and the runtime. On the dynamic side, on the runtime side, I saw several products already that actually load packages with a certain framework. So they load packages dynamically based on the tenant, think about products that have multiple integrations. Maybe that product will load certain libraries for one tenant and other libraries for another tenant, and they're not going to have the same agent, or not necessarily going to have the same agent, or maybe not in the same environments. That's one. The second challenge is that how do we make sure that you have full visibility across all of your runtime? Because when you connect to repos, you just connect it to all repos, you see all code. But when you go to the production environment, it's really hard to enforce. Even think about any agent. Or what do you do with serverless? Or, some of that is EC2 that, people click on manually and spin it up and down. So the challenges are a bit different as long as you go, more on that right side. There are some challenges on the left side where you look at, as you mentioned, reachability. There's some buzz around that with packages. And the concept of reachability is essentially building a call graph that essentially looks for a package and whether that package is embedded in your own source code and whether the vulnerable function is being called to be exploited. The thing is that I actually looked, by myself at the almost 300,000 CVEs that exist today. I'll give you a guess. Okay, I'll ask it this way: how many of those packages even have a description that reflects on the vulnerable function? Have an idea? Very miserable, less than 1.5%. Okay. Oh, and maybe one more small detail. That less than 1.5% with those descriptions, it's function names that may be transitive function names. It's not necessarily the function name that is within your package. It may be a call to another package that your package includes. So it's not necessarily one-to-one relationship. It can be way further in the supply chain. So I like the hype, but then when I'm thinking what to do with it, it becomes when I'm thinking about the value for money or value for the buzz, I'm really excited about it, but then, okay, then what do you do with that?
I mean, I also haven't seen on that area something reliable yet. But still, going back to the beginning of the story, when you were explaining, hey, let's not increase the number of high severity risks and so on and so forth, right? Which is, I guess, only a temporary, better than nothing type of solution, right? Because at the end of the day, you want not to have high or high medium risk exploits, right? And you're not going to get anywhere if there are thousands of those, right? So somehow we need to figure out how to find out what is a higher severity risk, right? It sounds very almost unrealistic to me to say, hey, high is whatever is actually marked as high in CVEs, right? Somehow we need to figure out what matters, right? And get those small chunks, whatever the small chunks are.
Exactly. And this is why I'm saying that some of that problem is technological. Just find me what is important. Maybe find me, the different factors of whether it's being exploited in the wild, maybe not, maybe has an exploit. Maybe it's a less important product in your business and you want to take care of other products first. But at the end of the day, the thought process is that you need to understand what is important, who can help you fix what is important, and you drive it through either zero new to stop the bleeding, and or depends how you want to run that, depends on your maturity as well. You can also go through the backlog and find the people that are best equipped to help you in that journey. The two thoughts about the different ways to solve those problems. By the way, you can think of the dependencies between the repos, right? As I mentioned, sometimes you may have a repo that is not necessarily deployed to the intranet or deployed to the cloud, but still, due to the recent activity, it may be a product that is deployed on-premise, on your customer premises. That might be important, in some cases even more important than a product that runs in the cloud. It depends on the size of the business. So there are various factors to look at when you try to solve that problem.
Assuming we have a CVE that has been deemed critical and it has been proven to be reachable within my organization. This is why you can't just take, it's a critical. Therefore, we must do something with it. You've got to figure out, okay, is it reachable? Going back to Victor's example, log4j jar file is there, but you're not using log4j. It was just an orphan dependency that just keeps getting dragged along that's never being used. How can we even stay sane in figuring out, especially that type of situation? To me, the log4j is critical. It is in the application. It's on the disk in production, but we're never using it.
So you're touching a something that we're working on. But I'll give you I'll give you that in a nutshell, just to, not expose too much. In JavaScript or TypeScript, there is an algorithm that is called tree shake. The entire emphasis of it is that essentially you clean up all of the dependencies that you don't need so that your piece of code will be more lightweight, or when the deployment will be faster, or multiple benefits to it. This is something that we're essentially looking at, but not for JavaScript. What we're looking at is essentially something that is more generic for all of the languages that we support. That won't get you the less than 1.5% of that specific function. In many cases, you just want to answer a very simple question. Is anyone calling that package? And then you can give way broader spectrum of coverage, or maybe way broader coverage than the narrow coverage of the specific function that is being called. Different ways to slice and dice the data. Obviously, in those that you can look at a function, you will reduce the amount of false positives significantly. But as I said, it's a very small subset as opposed to, how much you can reduce by just examining that simple thing.
I've been seeing usage in networking in some other areas, but not sure that I've seen eBPF playing a role there. Is eBPF somehow related or useful when talking about security?
eBPF has a lot of use cases for security, especially on the monitoring side. You want to know what's going in and out. You want to identify anomalies. You want to lock down, processes and such. There are a few startups that I know that I really appreciate that actually utilize eBPF to identify the exploitability of the packages at runtime. But then the question is, okay, how do you fix it?
That's the only problem, realistically. If we could figure out how to fix all the vulnerabilities, we wouldn't have much of a problem.
Exactly. So the fix is not in the container. The fix is not in that daemon set that runs. The fix is in the code. So therefore, it's super important to find the right people to fix the problem for you. So that's one challenge. The other challenge specifically with eBPF as a technology is that eBPF is almost runtime, but not yet real runtime. So some cases, and we also played pretty well with eBPF for a while, you will see that if you want to block something, it works in some cases. Let's say you want to block an HTTP call, or you want to block a DNS query or a system call. In some cases it passes, in some cases it fails. And reason is because sometimes those system calls don't come really, synchronously. And maybe it's too late because it's just an observability capability. So there's some challenges with, like, if you wanted to implement something like virtual patching, it's really hard to assume that eBPF will solve it for you. But I believe that there are other ways to implement prevention if needed, probably through code or any injection into the process, something along those lines. Too technical, but I'm a techie guy.
Technical is
I'm
good.
a techie guy.
Technical is good.
I want to go back, and it's sad that I never heard this phrasing before. Victor, I don't know if you had. Tree shaking. Had you ever heard that before?
I did, but in passing, so never.
In other words, you ignored it because it was JavaScript?
Among other things.
I'm a Python guy, so I learned it from our CTO. And then I Googled, and then I typically believe him, but I was also curious about it.
I'm a Java guy, so again, this isn't normal to me, but it just seems like if I'm going to go back to my Log4j example. If it's not being used at all, right? It's an orphan that got hung along because of the Maven POM XML, right? It's just there. That's still going to be setting off alarms. Going back to the false positive, it is a true false positive in our scenario, but yet we're still going to have to do the dog and pony show. It's like, no, it's not a thing. I'd rather just get rid of the sucker. So it's interesting that you're trying to go after tree shaking at a more generic level. You were talking about you have supported languages. What are your supported languages today?
we support the major, package managers, the, Cargo, Maven, NPM, PyPy. Maybe I'm missing something. But essentially all the major ones are supported. And even there, we have some tweaks that we added to this. So for example, in Python, most projects that we see have a requirements file. And when you scan requirements files, it's like running the Maven dependency tree. You just need to download it to learn what the tree is. So there's some extended functionality that we're either have already or continue to invest in, because it's like we really want to nail that down to the place where if we can even remove some of that doubt that will be brought by developers, that will be huge for us. Because it's very easy to, let's say, impress with a single pane of glass and dashboards, right? But then when developers start to use security products, that's where many products fall. In our case, what we build is obviously a security product, but our main focus is really on that developer experience.
It's curious that you say that, because I have a feeling that one of the problems we have, and this is not only related to security, it can be extended to many other things, right? That we are often asking developers to use the tools that are very specialized and tailor-made for specific expertise. I mean, security, right? Security scanning, cool. You get list of all CVs. Developer is not going to know what to do with it, right? And again, not related to security directly, right? We see the same thing with infrastructure as code or anything else, right? So maybe we actually do need, and I'm talking as industry, right? Some kind of different interfaces, if not different tools, right? Depending on, hey, are you specialized in this, or you're just passing through and you need to survive it somehow?
I think that there are some additional areas that may help developers focus. So obviously you have the integration into IDEs. You have a lot of noise, hard to focus. Maybe, some plugins can actually give you the specific vulnerabilities associated to the files that you are working on. So you may not see everything. You'll see only the files that are open in specific tabs. Another way to do that, which is essentially how we do that, is through ChatOps. We noticed the increasing trend around platform engineering. And, in platform engineering, it's like, yeah, let me just put something in my chat and everything will be spun off for me. And that's essentially what we built. We built an entire interface for developers that it doesn't matter if they use an IDE or they, like the guy that wrote our secret detection functionality wrote it in VI. So there's no limitation to which tools you use. And there's no limitation to what type of an extension you install on your IDEs. As long as you can drive your program, and again, it can be security, it can be quality, based on events occurring or coming from the Git server or Git system that you have, then you can drive a lot of automation. In our case, when we detect vulnerabilities, we just send them directly to the pusher. Or maybe it requires an approval, then we'll send it to the security team for approval. So it all becomes very interactive and unique for everyone. Interestingly enough, a use case that actually came to us 3 times in the last month is, how do I engage my legal team to review package licenses before they're deployed to production? Well, same way, you just send them a Slack message or Teams, whatever you use with, and ask their approval or review.
Oh, and I hear the other way around. I hear questions, how do I avoid the legal team? They're going to bury me with, with requests.
Well, that's not a developer requirement, right? Developers just want the freedom, but security need that legal approval. Maybe it's a compliance requirement, or all of the fun around that. But legal are typically involved where they need to be involved. So just thought process about the interfaces and how you can take a program that may be a security, quality, performance, do whatever you want with that, and just send it to different stakeholders with a unique channel.
No, that's cool, because when I think about it, Slack or equivalent, Microsoft Teams or whatever people use these days, that might be actually the only tool that everybody in a company uses, right?
Exactly.
I mean, Git is probably the second most common, but still, legal is not going to use Git. Let's face it, right? Or marketing, right? But Slack is.
Exactly. The name of the game is essentially coverage in that case. How do you make sure that the right people are involved in the same process? Most common denominator is a tool that is essentially the communication channel in the company.
So if you can cover the standard communication channel, you can even get lawyers approving pull requests.
Technically, although they don't understand what pull request is.
Okay, so Arnica can be found at arnica.io. That's ARNICA.io. Nir, do you have anything else you want to tell us about? I mean, you've been sort of talking around Arnica, but why don't you just give us like the straight up, we're on the elevator. Now, Nir is in Atlanta. Downtown Atlanta, there is a restaurant that's rotating. I can't remember the name of it anymore, but it's got a big elevator. So you've got that elevator ride to tell us why people should think about looking at Arnica if they're not doing anything else today.
I'll simplify that. We are an application security co-pilot, not in the sense of machine learning and AI that everyone talk about, but a real co-pilot that helps application security teams to do way more with less resources. And the main focus and the way adoption that we get is through that good developer experience that we bring into the table. We also don't believe about hiding risks behind a paywall. So therefore, what we introduced is that single pane of glass capability that is essentially our freemium for unlimited users and unlimited time. Just connect your repos, get all of the risks, code risks and SAST, SCA, secrets, low package reputation, even permissions. All of that is completely free. And that's how we get more adoption. We believe that it's better in the way that we provide the interface, in our scanning capabilities. We believe that it's cheaper than many other tools. At least that's one of the points that we discuss with the customers. But I can assure you we're way faster. Part of our engineering team is contributing to Git. So we're very deep on how we got our Git operations going.
So when are you going to be adding subversion support?
Let's talk about
Better for us first.
Yeah, on the 40th of this month.
Got it. That's good. So not only can Arnica help you have a great developer experience, you can also have a great lawyer experience. And we know that if you keep the lawyers happy, everybody else is happy.
In my case, I need to keep my wife happy. Then I can get the lawyers happy.
So again, Arnica is at arnica.io, ARNICA.io. Nir, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks, guys. It was real fun.
We hope this episode was helpful to you. If you want to discuss it or ask a question, please reach out to us. Our contact information and a link to the Slack workspace are at devopsparadox.com/contact. If you subscribe through Apple Podcast, be sure to leave us a review there. That helps other people discover this podcast. Go sign up right now at devopsparadox.com to receive an email whenever we drop the latest episode. Thank you for listening to DevOps Paradox.